Hello! We're so excited you're here. We want to get the show going, and I want to introduce ourselves, the Pasadena Literary Alliance and Open Book, and me. I'm Olivia. Yay! Thank you. I'm Colleen Murray Payton, committee member of Open Book, presented by the Pasadena Literary Alliance, and we're just so excited you're here for such a fantastic event featuring Ed Zwick, Charles Yu, and Alex Convery. I'm going to say a little bit about who we are and do some shout outs, and then we're going to start the show. So the Pasadena Literary Alliance does three things. We recognize the accomplishment of authors, we advance community dialogue about literary arts, and we raise money. To this point in time, we have been able to grant over $500,000 in the San Gabriel. Yeah, wow, right, thank you. Yes, we've been able to do that in the San Gabriel Valley to area literary nonprofits. You can visit our website, PasadenaLiteraryAlliance.org, and find out all that information. You can see videos of past events, you can make a donation, and you can also submit your email address to us. And if you do that, we will communicate with you all the time about what we have going on. And we have a lot of things coming up. We have our Pasadena Festival of Women Authors on March 22nd. Yes! Our annual marquee event that is just fabulous is at the Pasadena Hilton. It is currently sold out, but there is a wait list, so put yourself on that because typically seats do become available closer to the dates. We also have a date for our next Open Book event, which is going to be on June 17th. And so mark your calendars, June 17th, that's with Michelle Hunovan and Claire Lombardo. Yes, fabulous local folks. The venue is TBD, so if you give us your email address, we'll be able to tell you where it is. And that is something about Open Book that's very interesting. Open Book is kind of like a literary rave. We're sort of a traveling act. We put things together very quickly. We do three events a season, and we really look for a wide variety of authors. So we're open on genre, we're open on gender, and we also look for really interesting locations, like this one, A Noise Within. And we're really excited to be here at Noise Within tonight. So thank you to the theater, and thank you for squeezing us in between productions of the fabulous Macbeth, which is going on here. So I can't imagine a better dramatic set for tonight's conversation than this one. The Pasadena Literary Alliance is not affiliated with any other organization. No one is an employee. We do not have staff. We do not make any money. We are not paid. We are all volunteer, which is a super important kind of piece of the heart of our organization. And I just want to have everyone in our audience tonight that's a PLA volunteer, please stand up so we can recognize you. Thank you so much to all these folks in the audience. Thank you so much. If you are interested in becoming a volunteer, we would love to have you find one of the people that just stood up, look for our name tags or a splash of red on our person. And that's usually a volunteer. We love new people, we love new voices. Please volunteer with us and give us your email address and we'll hound you. Just kidding, we won't. We also want to say that Pasadena, the greater community of Pasadena is so important to us. It's in our name, it's where we live, it's why we exist, it's what we are, it's who we are. And we're really pleased that tonight we've been able to partner with the Altadena Library Foundation and donate the event's proceeds to the foundation. I think Nikki Winslow and Catalina Theodoras, yeah, would you stand up? And Ashley Watts are here from the foundation. If you would stand up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. We're really so excited to be able to support what you do. The Altadena Library Foundation is dedicated to serving our community and helping it recover and rebuild. They're currently focused on purchasing mobile hotspots loaded with 14 months of free internet service for Altadena residents that lost their homes in the fire. And they appreciate us and we appreciate them. And we're really happy to help them support the Collected Wellness Campaign. So, hey, take out your phone. You don't hear that a lot. Take out your phone, go to PasadenaLiteraryAlliance.org and make a donation. You can click on Open Book, and you can make a donation to the Library Foundation. You can also scan the QR code upstairs after the show and make a donation. If we all did what we could tonight, we would make a big difference. So say hello to these wonderful folks from the foundation afterwards. We're so happy you're here. Thank you. And I want to shout out tonight's sponsor. We have a sponsor tonight, and it's the Good Neighbor Bar. Do we have good folks from the Good Neighbor Bar out here? Yeah, where are you? Wave to us. Yes, yes.
We'll say in August, September, right before our dinner. So,
You just opened in September 24. Look at that. The Good Neighbor Bar opened in September of 24. Here we are. You stepped up big time. You gave us wine and champagne, and we're so excited about that. So thank you for the good vibes. Thank you for the beverage. Please go check out the Good Neighbor Bar in Altadena. And thank you so much for being a sponsor tonight. We know that you are the heartbeat of Altadena. Okay, so that's it. Without further ado, let's start the show. We are thrilled to welcome three fantastic guests that are going to give us all a backstage pass into the business of Hollywood and the world of screenwriting. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of the program for about 10 minutes, so keep your questions top of mind. And if you have your phone out, now is the time to turn it off, or turn it to silent, or turn it to stun, or whatever you need to do, but don't have it on during the show, and don't take flash photography. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the safety exits. And now, take a deep breath, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Please put your hands together and help me welcome to the stage our guests tonight, Ed Zwick, Charles Yu, and Alex Convery.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Charles, Ed, thank you for
Hello.
joining us.
Hi. Thank you. Thanks.
What a castle we have behind us. Oh, no, it's exciting.
We insist on this.
So, Ed, I kind of want to take you back to the beginning when, your first inklings of, writing a memoir of all these films. You talk about how you went back to your journals. You go back to your shelf and you kept them for all these years, and you go back to the very first one, and you open the first page, and inside on the cover is written, "Creation is memory." I'm kind of wondering, what did the first thing you wrote, what did that mean to you, your very first day on set, and now looking back on it after such a journey, what does it mean to you now?
What it means is I was very pretentious even then. I mean, I was 21, and I was, going to the Cinematheque and thinking about movies and reading everything I could, and already then just trying to project myself into some world that I knew nothing about. I'd never been on a film set, I'd never been to California, but I somehow, like you, I suspect, and I suspect like you too, we imagined ourselves and have, came to reinvent ourselves in that notion of being in the movies, and that fanboy thing, that magic or that whatever it was we were looking for had to do with creation. It had to do with storytelling, and somehow I was lucky enough to see someone at a very early moment. I did not know how to thread a Bolex. I did not know how to work a moviola. And yet I saw this person, this writer, who had a vision and was able to surround himself with these extraordinarily talented people who were there to help him realize that vision. And the penny dropped. And I didn't look back.
Yeah, I think memory is such a huge piece of it. Charles, reading Interior Chinatown is obviously, work of fiction, of metafiction at that, but it felt so personal at the same time, and it made me think too, watching the show, it must have been so odd to spend, almost 10 years writing the book, and that's such a struggle in its own right, and then to have to say, do it again, as a show. I mean, I'm thinking almost like on a meta level, you must be remembering the writing of certain scenes that you're then adapting yourself. I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, it was, you described it well. I think it was like the reward for the winning the pie eating contest is more pie, and I think it was much harder for my wife than for me, to be honest, dealing with, my moods and stuff for the whole book. And they're like, oh, thank God that's over. And then now this. So, but it was an incredible, also just, to get to do that was incredible. And yeah, creation is memory. I think that is, the layers of, it was personal, it was based in some seed based on my sort of parents' immigrant experiences as new Americans. And then to tell that story and then you could tell it again and have to learn a whole new language and a whole new medium was really humbling, but just once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, I was kind of struck how, you both started in a very similar place, which was staff writer on a television show. I'm curious sort of what you took from those days. It's obviously you're a staff writer, right? So you're adapting someone else's vision. There's a showrunner and it is sort of like that meat and potatoes Hollywood writer job. As you look back on it now that, you both are obviously in a very different place, what were sort of like the formative lessons and memories you have from those days?
Well, I felt thwarted the entire time. I'd always been the kind of a mimic and okay as a mimic, but when I would see what I had done, it in no way resembled my inner life. And it was a job. I had never had a real job. I never had any money. It was very important to me to have all those things. And yet there was this very profound dissatisfaction with doing it. And I think I think there's inevitably a certain amount of fuck you in everything in one's career. And that a lot of what you do is in reaction to a lot of the experiences you have. And in this case, it yielded a lot. In one very specific way that it yielded something that was much later, we were writing about adolescence. And I felt that what I was obliged to write about had nothing to do with adolescence really, that I understood the kind of oppositional experience that one has, and only years later, when I had written this teenage part again and again and was told by, the network, that this was inappropriate, that I vowed at that point that we would write someone inappropriate. So it somehow actually was formative in a kind of negative example, which I thought the best kind.
Yeah, I have to say, to also reading the stories of Ed was just so, it was the kind of thing that as like when I was sort of first starting out or even before that, just dreamed of a Hollywood sort of memoir. It was just so fun to read and just amazing the kind of names you could drop, but also just the experience of the humility and generosity with which you tell the stories. For me, I feel like I got to do it in this kind of very strange second career way, because I had been a lawyer for 13 plus years. And so I was almost 40 and, my wife and I had moved to the suburbs and I did not think this was possible. And so I got to come in this very cushy way to a show that was sold for the season, and I knew I'd get to work on it for a while, and I just thought, oh, this will be a fun vacation, and then I'll get fired and I'll go back to being a lawyer. And it was just, incredibly difficult. But at first I didn't know how difficult. I just thought this is a lot of fun. And then after a few months, it sort of set in that I was expected to sort of, perform and produce. And so that dawned on me slowly. But yeah, it was a really incredible experience, because my first job was on this big HBO show, Westworld, and an incredible cast and producers and writers, and I just was learning a lot from everybody in that room, and it was a very strange way to be introduced to the world after many years of sort of writing in solitude.
When I think about how you began, and I think about Charlie, and the personal is the animating force, and it was for me, and clearly was for you, and obviously for you, even autobiographically, to some degree, you know, by extension. And I think that I was exposed to something very early on, and I watched that process of transmutation where someone had taken a personal experience and had turned it into art. And that became very important to me, and it sort of became a kind of mantra to me about personal storytelling. And when I say personal, I don't necessarily mean autobiographical. I mean the investment of something of your own in it. And that literally is when it started, and that's what I can identify with what both of you guys have done.
Well, you got that great cartoon from the New Yorker in the book. That's a guy, clearly a frustrated writer, sitting at his typewriter. He's surrounded by dogs, so he can see his wife behind him yelling at him, write about the dogs. And it's, you know, it's the advice you hear over and over again in film school, isn't it? Write what you know, write what you know. And I think the hardest, for me, the hardest lesson.
Well, you don't know anything in your 20s. But what do you know?
That's it, right? So to me, the biggest lesson was exactly what you said, which is how do you write what you know without writing an autobiography, right? It's sort of, you can find what you know in a character, you can find it in the world, you can find it in experience. But to me, that's always the challenge. And, you know, the best films, the best writing, it's all personal. Like we're talking about the Interior Chinatown, you know, it again, it's fiction, but there's so much of you and your parents in it.
Well, you know, when I look at Charlie, at the series particularly, but the book too, you are channeling a spirit, and you talked about, you know, the generation before yours, and yet they're in you. You are finding their voice, and their voice is familiar to you, and you can write it. And that's happened to me before as well. And I think it's just this beautiful way in which we are, you know, historians and legislators of those other generations too.
One thing I really wanted to ask you guys about, you know, early in the book, you say, you know, the work gives you purpose, right? It gives you sort of that raison d'etre. But for us, it can be so difficult because you're writing a screenplay knowing that there's a good chance no one's ever going to see this. You know, I really related to the chapter about Shakespeare in Love, and that, you know, you had found what you thought was going to be the script of your career, and the decision to make a movie is never the writers. It's sometimes not even the directors. You know, it's these corporate machinations going on far above us. You know, as you saw, it was Julia Roberts pulls out of the movie, and suddenly they're breaking down your set the next day. So I wonder how, you know, how does that dichotomy work for you, and that the work gives you purpose, and at the same time, so much of it is out of your control?
No, I was a theater kid, and that meant that, you know, I walked backstage here and I looked at that scene shop and the smell of the sawdust, and I literally am cast back to being 15 years old and being 17 years old and staying up all night and, you know, not doing anything. It was only for love, only because this was passionate. And the closer I can stay to that, the happier I am. And I did it then for free. And what you learn very early on, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, I think, is that nobody really talks about how much disappointment and frustration is baked into the process. And that your only choice of having a real career is how you can tolerate that, and how you can just internalize that and yet have the residual, just the resources to go on and get up. It's not if you're going to get knocked down, but when you get knocked down, and what do you do? Can you get up? And that becomes actually the thing that lets you have a career, only because you love it that much. In addition to which, you're probably not fit for anything else.
You know, it reminds me in the book of, you know, the great last 20 pages where, you know, Willis is Kung Fu guy. So what he's wanted to, he sort of set this mental finish line for himself. If I can be Kung Fu guy, I'll be happy. If I'll be Kung Fu guy, I'll be happy. And he gets there, and at the end he says, why did I ever want this so bad? You know, so I think it to me, it is, you know, there are echoes of, you know, sort of finding the self-satisfaction in the work itself. You know, if you're process focused, I just think you're doomed, you know, because you can, one Julia Roberts decision and suddenly that project is over.
If only it were always, if it came to be known as a Julia Roberts decision.
Well, and to me, the great irony of that story is you still win an Oscar from it, but Harvey Weinstein pushes you aside so he could speak, so it's this.
However, if you wait long enough by the banks of the river, the bodies of your enemies will wash pins.
Charlie, had you dealt with a similar thing, in terms of, the writer's room, staff job?
I've never met Julia Roberts or Harvey Weinstein. Have I dealt? I've dealt with things. I mean, on nothing near the scale of either sort of inherent interest level or just sort of commercial reality. But sure, yeah, I think.
Yeah, I guess I mean more sort of like you've run the race, you get past the finish line, and you think I'm still dissatisfied. You spent years and years as a lawyer thinking if only I could write, if only I could write, if only I could write, and then they say, okay, here you go, here's your show, and you think, I did it, and there's still so many hard days, and I'm always curious, like how do you get past those?
I mean, I think it's. I mean, finding and this just sounds kind of, I don't know what it's going to sound like, but it's true. It's like it has to ultimately come back to the pleasure and the work and just the people you're working with, and that I kind of learned the hard way. I do think that there's certainly a buildup of like, oh, it's going to be, once this is out in the world, I can't wait for, what's the reaction going to be like? But I had a little bit of training from books, because books, as this is a books crowd, it's like every book is that, I mean, there's 15 books a year that it's not that, 200,000 books a year, it's not going to be what you thought. So I kind of knew, but still, you think it's TV, it's going to, and not to say it wasn't wonderful in many ways, but yeah, I think the like learning, being humbled, and training myself to remember, right, I don't do this for that, I do this for the other thing.
It's so funny because having done so many movies or TV, this was my maiden voyage to write a book. And what was remarkable to me is that people's reaction to seeing a movie or television is generally, yeah, I saw it. Yeah, it was good. What's for dinner? It just seems to be gone. But people who read a book, they connect to it, they invest in it in a particular way that I always had in books, and they, particularly if it's introspective or retrospective, and they then come back to you, they take the book home with them, they take it to bed with them, they whatever, and they have a much more passionate affiliation to it, and that's what you get back. I've gotten letters and responses, and it's really.
Listen, you hardly get it. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, it's a longer tail. It's a smaller tail, but it's a long tail, and it is fulfilling in a totally different way. Yeah.
Does the writing itself feel different to either of you? You said
So many words.
It's the funny thing about Interior Chinatown, right? It's that blend between the two. What was the book always in that format, or did you kind of find your way into it?
There are early drafts that were nothing like that, and then that became the form when it was fun. But yeah, it is. It's many more words, and yeah, I don't know what else to say to that. That's true.
But your mentality when you're sitting there writing it isn't markedly different.
I think I had to learn the hard way that things aren't so transferable. I mean, stories are, but they're inherently very different medium.
Well, also with a screenplay, it is 120 pages. No scene is larger than 2.5 pages. It's in dialogue mostly, and it's in that sense the form is like a sonnet or a villanelle. It's got a rhyme scheme and the scansion, and you are a prisoner of form, but form creates it. To me, in a book, how much should be internal monologue? How much description? Where is up and how long is right? And so that to me was a little bit like body surfing and being caught in the washing machine for a while, and where am I? And I had to locate myself and find ways to find a different internal rhythm. That was for me a challenge.
Yeah, must you know, and memoir is such an interesting form, right? I mean, to go back through all those
You're
years.
another interesting form of fiction.
Right. You know, I wonder was it similar to sitting down and writing a screenplay, and that you know your characters, you know your conflict, you want to hit on that, or was it sort of more ephemeral in a way?
No, I think that what was interesting for me was that it was more like really having a couple of glasses of wine with a friend in the middle of the night and telling a story, which is not what it's really like necessarily in a movie. But I did have an experience that was very interesting, which is that I have some very fancy friends who are wonderful writers and serious writers, and when I had started to write the book, you know, we all keep files, you know, in your computer, and my file was B-K, because I wouldn't admit that it was a book. And also, like, you know, like some religions, you can't say the name of God, you say G double, yeah, it's D, you know, and so for a long time I wasn't acknowledging it. It was just this thing I was doing. But finally, when I showed it to some friends, they were very encouraging, they were entertained, they were interested, and they liked the form. But they said something to me that I have said to every writer I've ever worked with when I've been directing someone else's work. They said, yes, great, but I don't feel you enough. And how perfect that would be what comes back to me when I had been trying to inculcate that to so many others. And so it was only in going deeper and digging, you know, opening a vein, that then the book actually took shape. And I think I wrote what then connected to other people more even than the dishy anecdotes.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about, you know, sort of screenwriting today and where the industry is at. You know, it's been such a tumultuous, I feel, 10 years. You know, one of the scenes that struck me so much in the book is your lunch with the head of Warner Brothers after Blood Diamond. The movie did well, and he sits down and he says, I'm super proud of this movie. It was nominated for Oscars. I'm going to put the poster on the wall in my office, and I'm never going to make another movie like this. Well, how the hell is that possible? And he goes on to say, you know, it only made $40 million of profit, and that doesn't move the stock price. You know, and this was 2006, you know, so this is, you know, almost 20 years ago, before the days even of Marvel and the cinematic universes. I just wonder, I kind of want to go back to that lunch table and what flashed in your mind hearing that?
Well, I mean, one thing is the idea of how fortunate I'd been to have done what I've been able to do, and yet one never thinks that you're not going to be able to do the next one and build on that in some way, artistically or creatively, whatever. And you know, even when I wrote the book, that was, you know, maybe was it 2 years ago I wrote it, and then it took a year to publish, and you know, even in that time, the change has become exponential. And you know, it's a grim, it's just a landscape that seems, you know, more and more dystopic, because we have, not through any efforts of ours, but we have, you know, forsaken an audience and not created another audience, because when we were kids, we all watched aspirationally. We watched up. We watched things that were challenging and difficult and ambitious. And there wasn't a whole marketing campaign and a whole genre targeted at a level to whatever age you were, and oddly arrested you in that moment. And so in the absence of this, you know, greater bountiful landscape of real, you know, wonderful, artful things. Now, that's not to say there haven't those wonderful things occasionally in peak TV. God knows there is. But it's a very different experience. It's not that ephemeral experience of seeing a movie once and having its effect on you with its closure and the dramatic effects. And I think when you stop training an audience, you reap the whirlwind. Sorry.
No, this is good. I know what I have to have. I mean, this isn't movies, but speaking of watching Up, I remember watching 30-something as a young tween or something, and just like trying to understand. I was like, I know everybody's saying this is so good and so important, I have to understand it. And then it's just, the kinds of things that you did and when you did them, it's just really, groundbreaking. And I remember watching Tootsie as a very young child, and like I don't know if my parents took me or how, or maybe it's VHS, and trying to imagine, an average 7-year-old watching that movie now. But
I think it says a lot.
I mean, I haven't had a produced screenplay. I want to ask you. I mean, what is it like to have a hit movie that did really well and was acclaimed? And I don't know, how's it feel?
Well, it's funny reading your memoir. I think part of the calculation never changes, which is the most important part of that equation is a movie star who wants to make the movie. That when you have an actor who has urgency and says, I want to be in this and I want this to be the next movie, the doors that were previously locked start to open up. And, I felt like over and over again, sort of reading, whether it was Matthew Broderick and Glory and how sort of central, sort of dealing with that was, Julia in the original version of Shakespeare in Love or Leo in Blood Diamond. It sort of is like, okay, like, if you can get an actor of that caliber interested in material of that quality, then that's where you can sort of go back to the studio and say, sure, this isn't a Marvel movie, but you can put someone on the poster.
And they're the only hope now.
Yeah.
With their ambition, the fact that they have the aspiration to really do something of quality when they're not wearing tights.
And so when you sit down to write a script now, do you think about it differently, or is it it's the same process?
Yeah, I can't. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, that would be like, aiming low and hitting the target.
Right. I'm interested in sort of where both of you come to start, like what is that lightning strike? Because, Ed, you've done so many historical epics, romantic comedies, and sort of everything in between. It's I think today, especially, it's rare to see a writer-director sort of move in genre like that. So I'm interested, is it character first? Is it a line of dialogue? Is it a little piece of history? Like what sort of is the strongest lightning strike?
I literally, I can't answer it. That's the ineffable thing.
Yeah.
You can say, if this thing can interest me for 2 years, that it might possibly interest other people for 2 hours. And that's a significant decision, because how long has it taken you to get your next thing going? You said 2 years, right? And you have to be so just disproportionately passionate, because whatever you do is inevitably going to be reduced and compromised by the amount of money you have, by the people who do it, by the time, the kind of marketing they do, by the, and your own inadequacies of this and the other, and everything diminishes it. So you have to begin with this just ridiculously outsized vision, hoping that by the end of what's left is that thing that drew you the entire time, that it remains, and that it is uncompromised, and that it is some unsullied thing that cannot be chipped away at. And you see that, I don't know who's seen Anora this year, right? It's a very specific vision of a thing, and that is what movies are, and when they work, and they can't be, they often can't be pitched, they can't be, they're certainly not the legacy of an algorithm.
Right.
There's some very personal, often weird, eccentric notion of what a story is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really inspiring to hear Ed talk, because I think, being 10 years in, but relatively new to this, I think in a lot of ways, and I've started to learn in the hard way what you're talking about. I think of like how important that is, because all the forces are against that. Every temptation, every just reality, practical, just ego driven, just everything wants to fight that and to try to hold on to that, because to have a career like you've had, but even just to survive, I feel like is important to hold that, but it just sometimes seems impossible. I tend to, I don't aim low. I think I aim very high, but then I turn 90 degrees and shoot at a different target, which is a very weird thing that TV networks don't really like that. When you're like, look what I did. They're like, that's not what we asked for. But I think that's also another strategy. It's just, like, to do your own thing, I guess. Not exactly out of bravery, just out of like being a weirdo.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of it. I always describe it like kind of like it's like being in love. You can't quite explain it, but you just know it when you feel it. Something I'm curious about now, like you're referring to sort of being mired in the development process and 2 years on an idea that you love at first, and now you're rewriting it for the fifth time. You can still love it, but how do you get through the tough days? Like when you're in the mires and mud of a rewrite. How do you get that spark back?
I think you have to have something else in your life. And something that gives you the kind of validation that you're not getting, the affirmation that you need. And that could be family, you hope that it's love, that it's a passion, politics, a hobby, sports, those things that are there for you and that are faithful lovers and will always be there, as opposed to this bitch goddess that you're chasing. It's gonna break your heart 2/3 of the time.
It's really interesting, The Adventures in Screenwriting, I think, is the Bible on screenwriting. William Goldman, obviously, such a master. He has a line in there about, once the passion is gone, you can't get it back. And to me, that's like one of the few parts of the book I kind of tend to disagree with, because I think sometimes you have no choice, you have to find it again. And I just think of, even the first screenplay I ever wrote, it was dead in the water, and it was just sort of looking at it a slightly different way that sort of got me excited about it again.
Oh yeah, Charlie's talking about a long tail. A movie, Legends of the Fall, took 7 years. Or in fact, I came upon the book that my girlfriend then gave me. I was 22 and wrote these notes in the paperback. I was 22 and I made the movie when I was 40. There was another thing that took 7 years. These things don't leave, they exist, and it's not just they're in the bottom of a drawer, or sometimes they come returned in another form. I made a movie about Japan, about the 19th century Japan, and yet the basis of that movie was in something that I wrote when I was in my early 20s about Tibet, about someone who had gone there in the 1950s with the young Dalai Lama. And so that the spirit of it, and that's what I mean, the personal part of it, was always there. It was in a different box, and yet it was the same.
What's your toughest rewrite? Knock your head against the wall. What's the trick?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't broken through in that way, because then we were talking a little bit backstage about a certain thing that we know in common, project where I've been rewriting it for 4 years, and I don't know that it'll ever get made, but I think that to me, to the extent I have anything worth sharing, it's sort of like the good days aren't what make you a professional, it's the bad days. It's like, what's your floor? Because everyone can have a good day, and I don't have that many. It's like, what's the average day of like, grind it out, I don't if anyone watched like PGA golf, it's like, what's the worst that professional's gonna do? He's gonna make a par or a bogey probably. It's like, okay, what are my bogeys? And I think learning how to just, still produce something even when the passion's gone. But I do totally agree with that. It's like also learning to step away. You seem and look very young to me. I feel like I just turned 49. I feel like if I had the luck to be as successful, like in my 20s or 30s, like had gotten to this break and not be pushing 40 by the time I even started, it would have been so different. I think it would actually would have been really, you also succeeded very young. I just don't know how, to me, I think I've had the perspective because I did have that day job for so long. So I'm like, this is not even a job. I'm just gonna, every day still seems pretty fun. I mean, even, yeah.
That's the secret, right? I mean, you wake up in the morning and I cannot think of a day when I said, oh, fuck, I've got to go to work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard when you then sit down at the desk and it's hard to get started and whatever, but yeah, you're not commuting. It's a,
No, totally. I think that can, in some ways, that can be the hardest part of it, though. You sort of get these mental games with yourself of the day you don't produce pages, the day, that you talked a little bit about, the first week of Glory, right? And how terrified you were looking at those dailies, so how do you, what's the feeling, how do you confront that sort of, I'm so lucky to be here and also this is terrifying?
I think because it happened when I was young, I might not have been smart enough to know just how lucky I was, or if I knew just how privileged what this was, I may have been much more scared. There's a certain kind of blitheness of being young, and Orson Welles at 26 did not know that he was reinventing film when he made Citizen Kane. He just thought, hey, here's a great idea. What if we just dig a hole in the stage and put the camera down there? Oh, that's a good idea. And I think there was a lot of things that happened to me that were still the legacy of a kind of sophomoric, collegiate attitude of sort of a anti-authoritarian, because a number of things we did in the beginning were very different. And I think I was lucky enough to be in a time when some of the things that were predictable and conventional weren't working anymore. And that's when you talk about something like 30-something. Well, when we did 30-something, everybody else was a doctor or a lawyer or a cop, and we said, no, they're just these people. And that was radical, and now, of course, that's all that everybody's just,
Copying you.
well, I don't know about that, but I think that kind of vaguely vestigial 60s radicalism at least had some, perfume for me. And I'd like to think that we can hold on to it, but that's not easy, and those things that I've tried of that sort in recent time have gone down in flames, but it doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
This is always kind of the easy question, but, talking about your early days, I'm always curious sort of, if we can go back to your first book, and time travel exists, what are you looking at yourself and saying, to the person who knows, so little?
Ooh. Enjoy it. I do think there's a freedom. I mean, I had a similar experience, I think, with like early fictional experience. It's like the freedom of not knowing what all the rules you're breaking, all the things you're doing wrong. That's really fun. And I don't know, also like, yeah, I miss that when it was just for nobody, really, no money, no chance of money, in literary short story. It's like, so, yeah, and yeah, I don't know what I would say to that guy. Can we trade places? I don't know.
Well, it's funny hearing you say that, because often it's sort of, who's your audience when you're writing? Like, to me, it's yourself, like you're writing the movie you want to go see, you're writing, your passion about it. I think, to your point, Ed, if you try to write towards, the box office or what a producer wants or what the studio is saying their mandate is, I just think you end up with sort of the lowest common denominator. At the same time, the audience of one is the most difficult because you need to feel ever see it, right? So it's, to me, the challenge is always like, how do you reconcile those two things? which it's, astonishing to go back through sort of your book and IMDb by proxy and just see how personal each of those sort of grand epics was and how you can get a A+ movie star in each of those. Did it always start kind of that small of, I love this story, so I must write it?
Yeah, I guess, how do you talk about instinct?
Yeah.
You are, that feeling, the hair, that something that raises the hair on your arms, and I can't, I was smart enough early on to partner with Marshall Perskowitz, who's this brilliant writer and director too, by the way. And he used to say something about, he used to tell this old Jewish joke about the Jewish screenwriter goes and tries to pitch a story to an executive, and the executive says, what do you want to do? He goes, well, I want to make period movies. He goes, okay, well, what period? Mid-century, romance, war movies. No, I want to make them so beautiful that the people drop dead, period. I mean, there are only two kind of movies. There are memorable movies and forgettable movies. And you try to make memorable movies.
I think that's the line in the book, right? It's like you have the box office, you have the critics, you have the reviews, but the only thing that matters is time, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And is that what you return to? I mean, look, you had gigantic Oscar-nominated movies, you had movies that didn't do as well. How?
Well, but some of those movies that made a big splash have dimmed, their luster has faded, and others that were done with the same passion and the same intensity have somehow hung in there. I found out there's a movie that we made 3 years ago, more, just before COVID, so 4, that we could not get real good distribution for, and Netflix finally bought it, and it's #1 on Netflix right now on the movies. Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. The other kind of big topic I wanted to hit on is just sort of, I feel like all of your work and Charlie, obviously with the book, there aren't movies about politics, but politics are so within them, and we find ourselves in sort of such a dark and confusing moment. I wonder sort of, what comes first, like when you set out to write, whether it's Blood Diamond or Glory or these sort of, people call them like issue-centric movies. How do you reconcile those two things of writing such, that that is going to be a talking point of the
Well, except when I saw Enter Chinatown, that's the way to do it, is to put the politics in there and to include the humor and the observed behavior, and that's, to me, the most political of all.
Yeah.
When you can do that, I think. Obviously, if you set out to try to do something in capital letters, it's going to seem worthy.
Yeah.
And I think if I look at those movies that may ostensibly be more overtly political, if they work as human dramas. Yeah. I mean, this Glory, yes, it's about, revisionist history and forgotten, and it's about dignity, and it's about race, and it's about a lot of things. But it's also about this band of plucky men who get together to take that hill, which is a genre story. And Blood Diamond, yes, it's about the exploitation of resources of the third world, and it's about all those things. But it's about the relationship between these two men, the unlikeliest of pairings, who find some commonality as they go through this adventure. And that's genre. So in some sense, that's hybrid. And I think if you're trying to do something that is political overtly, it's held to a higher standard.
Yep.
Because it's the first thing that people aren't going to want to see. Like this movie that I made, it was called Trial by Fire. It's about capital punishment, and there's no way to hide what it's about. And it was not a plucky guy trying to, gain that goal. It was about a man facing his death. Hard to hide that.
Right. You know, and kind of hand in hand in that comes, again, sort of, you know, I feel like the last 10 years especially, there's been such a sort of arbiter of who can write what and what characters is each writer supposed to write. And, you know, it's just ironic we find ourselves now in sort of like the dismantling of that sort of DEI has become such a national top talking point in really, you know, rather disturbing way. I sort of wonder, like, when you guys sit down to write, is that ever on your mind, or has it become on your mind in the last 10 years, or is it just something you just don't think about and focus on the story?
I mean, if I'm being honest, it's hard not to think about it. I try not to let it, you know, infect the actual work, but as a person in the world, I'd certainly think about it. I do think that, you know, like, you know, it's, Ed was talking about it. I feel like, to me, if I'm sitting down to write something capital P political or even lowercase p political, I think it's probably going to be dead within a page, right? So I'm going to be bored, and I'm going to be out of my comfort zone and competency zone pretty quick. So to me, I have to figure out what the genre is and what's the story and who's this person, and that's really where I'm having fun and where I think I'm going to be able to tell a story. I do think about too that you know, this story in Terror Chinatown is about a guy who is, you know, of Chinese American background. It's never, you know, explicitly stated exactly that his parents are immigrants. You know, it's sort of implied, but at the same time, it's clearly what it's about, and yet it's trying to be more than that, you know. And I think of representation in the way of like that we're not just watching a show so that people that look like Willis can see people that look like themselves on screen. We're hopefully watching a show so that all of us can see ourselves in all of those characters, whether or not they look like us. And that's what representation is actually for. And I think about someone like Ed's career, which I think is so remarkable because you have written on such a range of things. I wonder if you'd be allowed, you know, to make a lot of
As Marvin asked the question, although I have to point out, there's one thing in the pilot of Terror Chinatown when they're trying to identify the ethnicity of the hot detective. And that is the most wonderful moment of, you know, sort of self-knowledge, and yet a much broader statement that you make in the context of humor. But no, it's a good question. It's a good question because I can't roll back the clock, and like I do know that had I not made that movie, it's pretty clear to me that maybe that movie may not have ever gotten made. Right. So I take, you know, that's the ultimate bottom line of all of it. I do know that, and I try to write about this a little bit in the book, that it was maybe even some of my ignorance and temerity to do this that taught me a certain kind of humility that actually, in my learning experience of being affected by what was happening that I was confronted with, somehow found its way onto the screen. And these, particularly the actors, but a lot of the men around me who were doing that movie had come for real purpose. And I suppose there's a meta even in the story of a young white guy who's set to be in charge of this regiment, and here's a young white director presuming to tell the story of a black experience that had its spill. So would a black director do a great movie about it? Of course. Would it have been the same movie? No, it would have been a different movie, maybe better, maybe worse. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, it was so interesting in that chapter to feel like Matthew Broderick even realized that, you know, almost on set, that that movie was centered in you know, in a way that he kind of fell out in a way, in terms of just what was happening on set. You know, it makes me think of you know, something else I'm very curious about, you know, as someone who hopes to direct one day, is sort of that, you know, you talk about it multiple times in the book, Ed, and, you know, Charlie, obviously having showrun, you've been through a similar thing where it's sort of, materials on the page. You get the set and you have the best intentions and you know, you think you know exactly what it's going to look like, but stuff starts falling apart, right? Whether it's a difficult performer or the light's not a certain way or the blocking isn't right, you know, like sort of.
Every day.
Exactly. So, you know, as the person who actually wrote the script, though, you know, how do you reconcile those two things?
I wasn't the director. I never directed. So.
But as a
I'm very
showrunner, you know, you're making
Yes.
all-
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, it is every day. That's what I learned, is to not carry those expectations. You have to somehow hold those two opposing things in your head, which is I have to insist on my vision and yet somehow be humble enough to realize there's no way that vision's making it out of this sausage grinder. It's like, it's gonna be sausage, just make it tasty.
No, I mean, I think the reason they actually pay us is to figure it out on the day, because inevitably that thing that screenwriter wrote, even if it's you, he's gone. Right. Because it either works or it doesn't work, and there it is, and you've got, you know, 10 minutes to figure it out, and you're already behind, and so you do your best. You figure it out, and you come to trust a certain amount of just utter improvisational energy, and you just do it. Particularly television, and that's what is the great part about it, is that it's going on the air, you know, and you have a schedule that you're holding on to, and you have no choice. And I think sometimes there's a preciousness that happens even in screenwriting and in development, in which you've leached the life out of something in the notion of consensus or perfection among the team. The team. You know, what is this team? You know, that everything, we're going to go back and we're going to socialize this with the team. Even the language makes you want to throw open your mouth.
Can I just real quick? No, it's so true. The chapter though on 30 something, I have to go back to this. It just sounded like such a magical thing and all the people that came out of it, and how many directors kind of grew out of your tree, basically, right?
Yeah.
What can you? I mean.
Well, I mean, look, we were young, and I had been in the theater, and the idea of an ensemble was really important to me. And these were people, most of them had come from the theater, the actors, and there was something very familiar about it. Obviously, my best friend, my wife, his wife, one of the actors' kids went to school with his kids, and one of them had been a friend of mine. It was very much of that sort of communal spirit, and we kept it. In other words, everybody came to dailies every day, whether they were in the show or not, whether they had written it or not. We talked about it, we lived it, and when one of them wanted to direct, well, they then came and observed, and they became part of a process, and we all stole from each other. From the first year of 30-something to when I did Glory was 2 years of shooting television. I couldn't have made that movie had I not had the experience of the 2 years before it of just shooting film. Because when you look at the legacy of George Stevens and, you know, the great directors, John Ford, he had made 39 one-reel movies before he made Stagecoach. And we just got to make film, and everybody got to shoot it and then cut it and be in the, and it was a remarkable moment in which we were in a bubble. We had no idea of the outside world. We were raising children, and we were doing this. Both were impossible. And we did it, and everybody sort of picked each other up, and when somebody would get sick, and there was divorce, and there was fights, but it all existed in this hothouse, and that was the subject. The subject was the hothouse of these friendships and these marriages. The lead actor's wife was playing someone else's wife on the show. You know, I mean, it got very, very Bloomsbury.
Well, I know we're going to turn it over to questions here quickly. It's funny. I thought that, to me, the most sort of emotional and moving part of the book, and it's funny because you said the exact line, was when you went to visit Sidney Pollack in the hospital. You know, he'd gone sick, and, you know, I feel like you do with your mentors. You wanted to tell him how much he meant you. And he sort of waves you off and wasn't one for sentimentality, but, as you were getting up to leave, he looked at you and said something. Do you remember what that was?
I think I do. I think he said, enjoy it.
Yeah. And that's exactly what you said too. And I feel like, it's just funny reading through all the trials and tribulations and joys and tragedies that it kind of comes down to that one sentence.
Oh, come on. I mean, look how disproportionately rewarded we have been for doing this thing. When you look at, firemen and doctors and, and school teachers and whatever, the whole society has chosen to give us this opportunity. I mean, if you're not in gratitude fully 97% of the time, someone should hit you in the head with a board.
That's funny. I mean, in that chapter ends and you say, best advice I ever got.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the truth. Okay, great. We can turn it over to questions if anyone in the audience has one.
Yes, please let us know if you have questions. You can raise your hand, and if you would stand and ask your question, that would be great. Did you put your hand up that you have a question? Okay. Okay, we have a question here. I'm going to come around the other side, actually, and give you the microphone. Thank you.
Hey everybody. So the question I kind of had is something I'm getting impression in regarding this industry. It moves very fast, right? They ask for a lot and they expect things to turn around really quickly. So one thing I struggle as kind of a writer and a screenwriter is sort of having a good turnaround time. Like I'm working on one script and I started it in 2023, and even now I'm still trying to condense it. So I'm wondering if you have any advice in regards to like how to sort of shrink that turnaround time, or is this sort of like every project is like some of this is going to take a long time or some are going to be short and just kind of cut roll?
Go for it.
I mean, for me, context is so important, right? It sort of depends on who you're writing it for and what their expectations are. But at least in my experience, it's quality is everything, right? Like I would rather turn in a great script 2 weeks late than a mediocre script on time. Again, you don't always have that luxury, right? Like it's so dependent on what you've been asked to do and who's asked you to do it. But for me, as much as yes, everything's moving and that part can be stressful, you want to get it right. But at the same time, you also can't drive yourself crazy trying to do so, right? So it's sort of like when you're at peace with it, it's ready.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. I was wondering, I have two questions, right? But I guess my first question is, what would be like your advice to somebody who hasn't even been able to put their foot in the door, and kind of what does that process even look like, getting your foot in the door? Is there a path for an anti-authority writer still in the industry? And my second question is, how do you know when your work is done? Like when you finished a screenplay or you finished a book, how do you know when you're like, okay, I'm ready to put this out there?
Well, you're more recently that writer, so you start with it.
Well, the first one, I think it's, look, I think in a lot of ways there's today more than ever, there are a lot of ways to get a script out there. Back in the day, I think it was a little more walled off. I mean, even when I was starting, 10, 15 years ago, it was sort of like you have to know someone who knows someone. And that was always the challenge. It was like, who were these mystical people? Look, I think like there are some very tried and true, just like nuts and bolts ways in, right? Like win a contest, win a fellowship. The Nickel Fellowship is run by the Academy and has turned out, a professional screenwriter almost every year. So just in terms of like, throwing something out into the void, to me, that's always your best bet. There are a lot of other fellowships too, whether it's something like Austin Film Festival. For me, right out of USC, placing in that competition was sort of my first foray into finding representation, an agent, a manager. And then there's something called the Blacklist, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but to me, it has its pros and cons, but in terms of getting like a professional read on a script and sort of knowing, what is a professional reader going to think of it, there's a lot worse ways to spend, whatever it is, $75 or $100. Again, are any of these things sure bets? No. But I would say over my 15 years, having gone to film school, been an assistant, been an intern, done the whole thing, like good scripts do get found from all over. But the quality is again sort of everything. And then I'll let you guys handle the second part.
Well, I mean, I would just agree with what Alex is saying. I think that's the good news and the bad news is the good scripts do get found. And I would say cultivate your voice too. I think that's really, what's the thing that you have that no one else has, and that's your voice. I think.
In terms of a draft being done, do you have any advice there?
I think a draft is never done. I think it's just abandoned.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to writing for yourself in a lot of ways. To me, it's sort of like if I can read through it and have sort of minimal notes, then it's ready for someone else's eyes. You can only be your own worst critic for so long. Eventually, you have to let someone else see it. I think having that trusted reader is really important.
That's right. I mean, somebody who would tell you that you're full of shit, the person who actually relishes the opportunity to tell you. that really, because we have a capacity for self-deception as writers, or even that sort of, it's that innate laziness to think, well, that'll work, and don't worry about it, and you've got to be the oncologist looking at the CAT scan. It's got to literally be there, and you've got to say that's got to go. You have to be cruel to yourself and ruthless and unkind.
Yeah. No, that's all right.
Very true.
It's all.
So, yeah, remember that.
First off, I want to thank the three of you. This was like sitting around in the castle just listening to the three of you talk shop. Really enjoyed it. I'm curious to get all three of your opinions. AI in the industry, it has been met with sort of a hysterical, whether it's the Brutalist and Adrian Brody's Hungarian, or if it's Zemeckis and Tom Hanks morphing and Home. How do you approach it as writers? Are you embracing it? Are you running from it? Is it hysteria? I'm curious to get the three of your perspectives on.
I write about AI. I don't talk to AIs. I'm a little scared, and I'm also lazy. So about that, I think it could be fun to play around with an AI. In terms of how it would affect writing, I feel like probably AI could generate better scripts than better scripts than I could in a lot of ways, algorithmically, in terms of pleasing an audience or not pleasing an audience, getting an audience to stay all the way to the end, I think AIs can probably already do better than I can. Not better than these two guys, but better than me. And I'm okay with that, because I don't think it'll ever replace some percentage of things, and I think that's the percentage that I'm interested in trying to make. Same with books. I'm sure AI is writing great books right now, not great books, writing books, and that will be read by many people, many more people than will read my books, and I don't know what to do about that, but I'll just keep scribbling.
I don't know. I think obviously as a tool, do I mind that they worked when Adrian Brody's accent? No. Do I think that it can be a tool to realize a vision of a director or a production designer? No, I think that's great. I do worry about the business of copyright. I do worry about the fact that they're going to take things of all of ours, or even Homer and Shakespeare and whomever else, and they're going to create a document, and then they're going to come to us to ask us to polish that document, but that will be a gig economy then. we will not have the copyright to that. We will be working for that thing that they've created, and already they believe themselves to be the progenitors of the material. That's a thing that we confront all the time when they think the movie is theirs, and they're letting us do that. And the tail, the dog has caught the tail in that regard, and it's, that to me is a very worrisome thing about the economics of writing. What you're talking about, Charlie, is they're not going to be able to capture the eccentricity and what you saw and what you brought to that story, which is so personal because they don't have ancestors. You know, they don't have a community, and whatever you're writing about or we're writing about, it's feel, and it will be imitative. But somebody actually, as an experiment, we took a couple of scripts, we put our scripts in there, and they gave it a premise, and they tried to imitate our voices. It wasn't our voices, but it was close, and it was that kind of uncanny valley thing, where it makes you a little bit nauseous, but it's somewhat real. And the same with music. I'm sure you've heard them do that too. So yes, I think that as a tool, great, but I'm afraid that given the opportunity to create the algorithmic version of a screenplay, that they're going to do it more.
Yeah, I would kind of echo all of that. I mean, AI can definitely write a script. It's just not it's an iterative one, right? Like that's what the technology is. So to your point, yeah, if it could write the next Spider-Man movie, it could write the next Godzilla movie. It could, you know, whether that's going to be good or not, or whether they even want those movies to be good is a real question. The more challenging thing with it, the void that has not crossed yet, is that new original voice, which, you know, to back to your question about what gets a writer noticed, that's 100% what it is. It's like a fresh, young, exciting new voice. AI can't do that. You know, it could write a version of Tarantino. You can't say make a new Tarantino. It doesn't work like that. So, you know, we'll see if it can or not. But I have my own skepticism around it.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions. I think your voices were so marvelous. Thank you so much to Alex Convery. If you haven't seen Air, watch it. It's a fabulous movie. If you haven't seen Glory or Legends of the Fall or Blood Diamond or 30-something, I don't know what you've been doing for the past 7. If you haven't seen Interior Chinatown or read Interior Chinatown, it is fabulous. It's on Hulu right now. And both Ed and Charles have books upstairs, so we want to invite you back up to the lobby. Buy a book. Ed had a book come out this week. Buy the books, talk to our speakers. Alex will be at the table too, and let them know how much you enjoyed it. And donate to the Pasadena Library Foundation. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night. Thank you so much. Good night.